Clara Sutton's hands were shaking when she pressed the pen to paper. 24 years of hunger. 24 years of being told she wasn't enough, and now she was betting everything on a stranger's advertisement. "I ain't pretty, sir," she wrote, her tears smudging the cheap ink. "But I can cook, I can work, I can stay." 1,800 miles away, a giant of a man read those words and felt something crack inside his frozen heart. Two broken souls, one desperate chance, a winter that would change everything. Stay with me until the very end. Drop a comment telling me which city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels. The letter arrived on the coldest morning Montana had seen in 40 years. Harriet Garrett sat in her rocking chair by the fire, her thin fingers trembling as she sorted through the pile of responses. 53 letters. 53 women desperate enough to answer an advertisement for a mail-order bride. Most of them she dismissed without reading past the first line. "I am considered quite beautiful by all who know me." Into the fire. "My father is a respectable merchant who can provide a generous dowry." Into the fire. "I have been trained in all the feminine arts and would make any man proud." Into the fire. Harriet was dying. She knew it. The doctor knew it. Her son refused to know it, but that didn't change the truth. Her heart was giving out one painful beat at a time, and she had maybe 3 months left. Maybe less. 3 months to save her boy. She reached for the next letter, and something made her pause. The paper was cheap, nearly transparent. The handwriting was careful, but unpracticed, the letters of someone who had taught themselves to write. No fancy flourishes. No pretension. Harriet began to read. "Dear Mrs. Garrett, my name is Clara May Sutton. I am writing in response to your advertisement in the Philadelphia Chronicle seeking a suitable bride for your son. I must confess straight away that I ain't what most would call suitable. I have no dowry. I have no family. I have nothing but my own 2 hands and the willingness to work until they bleed. I can read and write, though I taught myself from borrowed books. I can manage household accounts. I can cook plain food and mend plain clothes. I ain't pretty. I've been told this many times by many people in many ways. I reckon you should know that before you waste your time on me. But I am honest. I am strong. I don't break easy, and I don't quit. If you will have me, I will come. I will be a good wife to your son. I will give him children if God wills it. I will work beside him until my last breath. I ask only for one thing, a chance. Just one chance to prove my worth. I await your reply with hope in my heart. Respectfully yours, Clara May Sutton." Harriet read it again, then a third time. Her eyes burned with tears she refused to shed. "I ain't pretty. I've been told this many times." She understood that kind of pain. She understood what it meant to be judged inadequate by a world that valued silk over substance. And more importantly, she understood her son. Silas didn't need a beautiful wife. He needed someone who wouldn't break. The sound of heavy boots on the porch made Harriet straighten. She knew those footsteps measured deliberate, carrying the weight of a man who had learned to move carefully through a world that feared him. The door opened, and Silas Garrett filled the frame. At 6'6", he had to duck to enter. His shoulders were broad as a barn door. His hands were large enough to crush a man's skull, and Harriet had seen him do exactly that 8 years ago when he'd caught up with the man who murdered his brother. But it was his eyes that truly unsettled people. Gray as winter storms, cold as mountain ice. No warmth, no welcome, no hint of the laughing boy he had once been. A thick scar ran from his left temple down to his jaw. A reminder of the night everything changed. "Storm's getting worse," Silas said. His voice was a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. "Lost 2 more head to the cold." Harriet nodded. "Come sit with me, son." Silas's eyes narrowed. His mother rarely asked for company. He closed the door and crossed the room in 3 long strides, settling his massive frame into the chair across from her. Despite his size, he moved with controlled grace. The power of a man who had learned to restrain himself. "You ain't sleeping again," Harriet said. "The cattle don't sleep. Neither do I." "The cattle ain't haunted by ghosts." Silas's jaw tightened. He didn't respond. Harriet watched him for a long moment. The dark circles under his eyes. The tension that never left his shoulders. The way his hands were never quite still, always ready for violence. 8 years since Daniel died. 8 years since Silas had tracked Marcus Brennan across 3 territories and put a bullet through his skull. 8 years of silence. Isolation. Walls so high even sunlight couldn't reach him. Her boy was dying. Not from bullets or blades, but from loneliness. From grief. From the terrible weight of surviving when others had not. "I've made a decision," Harriet said quietly. Silas's gray eyes met hers, waiting. "I'm dying, Silas." The words hung in the air. For a moment, nothing moved. Then Silas's hands clenched into fists, the knuckles going white. "No." "Yes." Harriet's voice was gentle but firm. "The doctor says it's my heart. Could be 3 months. Could be less. I've made my peace with it." "Then find a new doctor." "Son." I said no. Silas rose from his chair, his massive form trembling. "You ain't dying. I won't allow it." Harriet smiled sadly. "Even you can't fight death, my darling boy. Watch me try." He turned toward the door, but Harriet's next words stopped him cold. "I found you a wife." Silas froze. Slowly, he turned back to face her. For the first time in years, genuine shock registered on his scarred features. "What?" "A mail-order bride from Philadelphia. She'll be arriving on the train in 2 weeks. Have you lost your mind? My mind's the only thing still working proper." Harriet held up Clara's letter. "Her name is Clara Sutton. She's 24 years old, orphaned, penniless, but she can read, write, and manage accounts. She's willing to work." Silas stared at his mother as if she had sprouted wings. "I don't want a wife." "I don't care what you want. I care what you need." "I don't need anything." "You need someone to share this burden with." Harriet's voice cracked. "Silas, when I'm gone, you'll be alone. Completely alone. This ranch is too big for one man. This life is too hard for one soul to bear. I won't leave this earth knowing my only living child will waste away in solitude." "Then don't die." Harriet laughed dry and painful. "Oh, my stubborn, beautiful boy. You think I ain't tried?" The anger drained from Silas's posture, replaced by something far more vulnerable. He looked in that moment like the lost child she remembered. The one who had cried for 3 days when his dog died. The one who refused to speak for a month after his father passed. "I can't," he whispered. "Mother, I can't." "Can't what?" "I can't let someone in." His voice broke. "You know what happens to people I love." Harriet's heart shattered. She rose from her chair with difficulty and crossed the room to stand before her giant son. Even now she barely reached his chest. She placed her trembling hands on his face, forcing him to look down at her. "Daniel's death wasn't your fault. I could have saved him." "No, you couldn't. Marcus Brennan killed your brother and you brought him to justice. That's all any man could have done. It wasn't enough. It was everything." Harriet's eyes glistened. "And now you must live, Silas. Really live. Not this half-existence you've been calling a life." She released his face and stepped back. "I'm asking you. I'm begging you. Give this woman a chance. She's coming whether you want her or not. All I ask is that you try." Silas closed his eyes. When he opened them again, the storm inside him had quieted to a dull roar. 2 weeks. 2 weeks. He nodded slowly. "I'll clear out the east bedroom." He paused at the doorway, his massive shoulders hunched. "Don't ask for more than that, Mother. Not yet." Harriet watched him go, and for the first time in months, she allowed herself to hope. 1,800 miles to the east, Clara Sutton sat in a cramped Philadelphia tenement reading Mrs. Garrett's response for the dozenth time. "Miss Sutton, your honesty has touched my heart. I believe you may be exactly what my son needs, though I warn you, he is not an easy man. He is scarred in body and soul. He does not speak much. He does not trust. But beneath his rough exterior lies a good heart, and I believe a patient woman could reach it. I have enclosed enough money for a train ticket and travel expenses. Come as soon as you are able. The winter is harsh here, but the house is warm and you will be welcome. Come quickly, child. Time is not on my side. With hope, Harriet Garrett." Clara folded the letter with trembling hands. She had not expected a response. In 24 years of life, she had learned not to expect anything good. Every time hope had dared to bloom in her chest, it had been crushed by circumstance. Her father, a shoemaker with gentle hands and dreams of something better, had died when she was 11. His lungs gave out from years of breathing leather dust and factory smoke. Her mother had followed 4 years later, worn to nothing by grief and poverty. One morning, she simply didn't wake up. Since then, Clara had survived on scraps, working as a cook in boarding houses that paid more in insults than wages, sleeping in cold rooms, eating other people's leftovers. She was not pretty. She knew this. Her face was too sharp, her eyes too large, her body too thin from years of never quite having enough. Men looked past her as if she were invisible, and the few who noticed made it clear her only value was in what she could produce with her hands. But somehow, this woman in Montana had seen something else. "Your honesty has touched my heart." Clara pressed the letter to her chest and allowed herself for one dangerous moment to hope. The train journey from Philadelphia to Stone Creek, Montana took 12 days. 12 days of rattling carriages and fitful sleep. 12 days of watching the landscape transform from crowded cities to rolling farmland to vast empty plains that seemed to stretch into eternity. Clara sat by the window, her single carpet bag clutched on her lap, and tried not to think about what awaited her. A scarred man who did not trust. A dying woman counting her final days. A life she couldn't begin to imagine. First time heading west. Clara turned to find an older woman settling into the seat across from her. Gray hair, kind eyes, a worn Bible clutched in weathered hands. "Yes, ma'am." "I can always tell." The woman smiled. "You've got that look, half terrified, half hopeful." "That about sums it up." "What's waiting for you out there, if you don't mind me asking?" Clara hesitated. "A husband, or at least a man who might become one." "Mail order bride?" "Yes, ma'am." The woman nodded without judgment. "I was one myself 40 years ago. Came from Boston to marry a rancher I'd never met. Thought I was making the biggest mistake of my life." "Were you?" "Best decision I ever made." The woman's eyes grew distant with memory. "He was rough around the edges. Didn't know how to talk to a woman. Didn't know much of anything except cattle and horses. But he was kind. That's what mattered. He was kind." Clara absorbed this. "How did you know that he was kind, I mean? How did you know it wasn't just pretend? I watched how he treated things weaker than himself. His horses, his dogs, the men who worked for him." The woman leaned forward. "A man can fool you with his words, honey. But he can't fool you with his actions. Watch what he does, not what he says." The train lurched forward, and Clara gripped her seat. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I'll remember that." The woman patted her hand. "You'll be all right, child. I can see it in your eyes. You're a survivor. Survivors always find a way." The train pulled into Stone Creek Station on a gray afternoon, with snow falling in thick, relentless sheets. Clara gathered her carpet bag and stepped onto the platform, and immediately she felt eyes on her. A woman with a pinched face, a man with a shotgun, children pointing and whispering. She clutched her bag tighter and looked around desperately. Mrs. Garrett had written that someone would meet her, but the platform was nearly empty. "You the Garrett bride?" Clara spun around. A grizzled old man in a battered hat stood behind her, studying her with sharp, calculating eyes. Yes, I'm Clara Sutton. Name's Jack Hollis, ranch foreman. Mrs. Garrett sent me to fetch you." Relief flooded through her. "Thank you. I wasn't sure." "Train's early." Jack said it like an accusation. "Wasn't expecting you till Thursday. The connections were faster than—" "Makes no difference to me." Jack turned and began walking toward a weathered wagon. 12 miles to the ranch. Best get moving before the light goes." Clara hurried after him, her thin boots slipping on the frozen ground. They rode in silence for the first hour. Clara watched the landscape pass in a daze. Endless white, distant mountains, a sky that seemed to stretch forever. In Philadelphia, she had been surrounded by walls. Buildings pressing in from all sides. People crammed into every available space. Here there was nothing but emptiness. It was beautiful and terrifying. "You're smaller than I expected." Jack's voice startled her. "I'm sorry." "The boss, he's a big man. Biggest I ever seen." Jack's eyes flicked to her. "Some folks thought he'd want a woman to match." Clara lifted her chin. "I am what I am, Mr. Hollis. Can't change my size any more than I can change the weather." Something flickered in Jack's expression. Approval, maybe. "Honest. Mrs. Garrett said you were honest." "I try to be." "Might want to try being careful, too." Jack's voice dropped. "Silas Garrett ain't like other men. He's been through things that would break most people. Seen things. Done things." "His brother." Jack's hands tightened on the reins. "You know about that. Mrs. Garrett mentioned it, not the details. Daniel was everything good about this family. Quick to laugh, quick to trust, loved by everyone." Jack's voice roughened. "When he died, it was like watching the sun go out." Clara stared at her hands. "And Mr. Garrett blames himself. He was supposed to be with Daniel that day. They were tracking some cattle thieves together. But Silas's horse threw a shoe, and he had to stop." Jack paused. "Daniel went ahead. By the time Silas caught up, it was too late." Clara closed her eyes. She understood that kind of guilt. She understood what it meant to carry the weight of what if for the rest of your life. "What if I can't reach him?" she whispered. Jack glanced at her. "Then at least you'll have tried. That's more than most folks have done." Stone Creek Ranch appeared out of the snow like a fortress. Clara had expected something modest. What she found was a sprawling compound, a main house built from heavy logs and gray stone, a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides, smoke rising from 2 massive chimneys. But what drew her attention most was the figure standing on the porch. Even from a distance, she could tell he was enormous. Arms crossed, stance wide, expression unreadable. As the wagon drew closer, Clara began to make out details. Dark hair, a hard, weathered face, a scar that caught the fading light like lightning frozen in flesh. Silas Garrett, her future husband. Jack brought the wagon to a stop, but neither of them moved. Silas's gray eyes swept over the wagon, taking in Jack's familiar form, before settling on Clara. For a long, terrible moment, he simply stared. Clara felt herself being measured, evaluated, judged. She saw his gaze note her thin coat, her worn boots, her pale, sharp-featured face. She saw the slight narrowing of his eyes, the tightening of his jaw. And beneath the ice, she saw something that might have been disappointment. Of course, she thought. He expected someone beautiful, someone who could bring light into his dark world, and instead he got me. But Clara had not survived 24 years of hardship by running from difficult moments. She gathered the tattered remnants of her dignity, lifted her chin, climbed down from the wagon. Her boots hit the frozen ground. She steadied herself against the wind, and then, holding his gaze with every ounce of courage she possessed, she climbed the porch steps until she stood before him. The difference in their sizes was almost comical. The top of her head barely reached his chest. She had to crane her neck to look into his face. Up close, the scar was even more severe. A thick ridge of white tissue that spoke of violence barely survived. Silas did not speak, did not extend his hand. He simply watched her with those storm-gray eyes, waiting. "Say something," Clara commanded herself. "Anything." The words that emerged were not the ones she had rehearsed. "I ain't pretty, sir." Her voice trembled slightly, but she forced herself to continue. "I expect you can see that for yourself. I ain't educated beyond what I taught myself from borrowed books. I ain't from a good family or a good situation. I got nothing to offer except my word and my work." Silas's expression remained unchanged. Clara swallowed hard. "But I can cook, I can clean. I can manage accounts and mend clothes and tend to whatever needs tending." She paused. "I'm not afraid of hard work, and I ain't afraid of you." For the first time, something shifted in those gray eyes. Surprise, or doubt. "You should be," Silas said. His voice was exactly as she had imagined, deep as a mineshaft, rough as unworked stone. It rumbled through her bones. "Maybe," Clara admitted. "But I've been afraid my whole life, Mr. Garrett. Afraid of hunger, afraid of cold, afraid of dying alone with no one to mourn me." She held his gaze. "After all, that one man, even a man as big as you, don't seem so terrifying." Something flickered across Silas's face. Gone too quickly to name, but Clara thought just for an instant it might have been the ghost of a smile. "You're bold," he said. "I'm honest. There's a difference." Silas studied her for another long moment. Then, without warning, he turned and walked toward the front door. "Jack will bring your things inside. My mother's in the main room. She'll want to meet you." He disappeared into the house. Clara stood on the porch, the wind howling around her, her heart pounding against her ribs. "Well," Jack said from behind her, "that went better than I expected." Clara wasn't sure she agreed. She took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and stepped through the door into her new life. The warmth hit her first. After the bitter cold of the journey, the heat from the massive stone fireplace felt like an embrace. And there, in a rocking chair by the fire, sat Harriet Garrett. Clara's first impression was frailty. A thin figure wrapped in shawls. Silver hair. A pale face marked by too many years and too much sorrow. But when Harriet looked up, her eyes held a sharpness that belied her appearance. Eyes that had seen everything, judged it accurately. "You're early," Harriet said. "Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry if—" "Don't apologize." Harriet gestured to a chair beside her. "Sit. Let me look at you." Clara obeyed, settling into the chair with her hands folded in her lap. Harriet studied her for a long moment. "You're thinner than I expected." "Food has been scarce." "Not here." Harriet's voice carried firm promise. "Here we eat. We eat well. The work is hard, but we don't starve our people." Our people. The phrase wrapped around Clara's heart like a blanket. "Yes, ma'am." Harriet's eyes softened. "You met Silas." "I did." "And," Clara considered carefully, "he's very tall." Harriet laughed, a sound like wind chimes, unexpected and beautiful. "That he is. Took after his father." Her smile faded. "Did he frighten you?" Clara thought about the gray eyes, the scar, the way he had looked at her like she was an equation that didn't quite balance. "He tried to," she said honestly. "I ain't sure he succeeded." Harriet's eyes widened, then slowly she nodded. "Good. That's good." She reached out and took Clara's hand. Her grip was weak but warm. "You're not what I expected, Clara Sutton. But I think you might be exactly what I hoped for." "I don't understand." "You will." Harriet squeezed her hand. "Silas is complicated. He carries wounds that don't show on his skin. He's built walls so high that even I can barely see over them anymore." She paused, and Clara saw tears gathering in her eyes. "But underneath all that armor is the boy I raised. The boy who cried for 3 days when his dog died. The boy who stayed up all night with a sick calf because he couldn't bear to let it suffer alone." Clara listened, absorbing every word. "He thinks love is a liability," Harriet continued. "He thinks caring for someone is just another way to get hurt. He's spent 8 years convincing himself that he don't need anyone." Her grip tightened. "But he's wrong, Clara. He needs someone desperately. He just don't know it yet." Clara felt the weight of those words settle on her shoulders. "And you think I can be that someone?" Harriet smiled, sad and hopeful all at once. "I think you might be the only one stubborn enough to try." That night, Clara lay in her narrow bed in the east bedroom and listened to the wind howl outside her window. She thought about the man at the end of the dinner table who had barely spoken, who had eaten mechanically like food, was fuel and nothing more, who had disappeared immediately after leaving her alone with his dying mother. She thought about the scars she could see and the ones she couldn't. She thought about the woman on the train who had told her to watch what a man does, not what he says. And she thought about Harriet's words. The boy who stayed up all night with a sick calf because he couldn't bear to let it suffer alone. Clara pulled the blanket tighter around herself. "I can do this," she told herself. "I've survived worse. I've faced worse." But as sleep finally claimed her, she wasn't entirely sure she believed it. Somewhere in the house, she heard footsteps. Heavy, restless. Silas Garrett was pacing, and Clara understood with sudden clarity that she wasn't the only one who couldn't sleep. The first week passed in a blur of work and silence. Clara rose before dawn every morning, a habit born from years of early shifts in Philadelphia boarding houses. She made her way to the kitchen while the house was still dark, while Silas was already out checking on the cattle, while Harriet slept her fitful, pain-filled sleep. By the time anyone else stirred, the kitchen was warm with the smell of fresh biscuits, bacon, eggs, and strong coffee. Harriet emerged on the third morning and stopped in the doorway, her eyes wide. "You made all this?" "I said I could cook." Clara wiped her hands on her apron. "I meant it." Harriet settled into her chair at the table, moving slowly, carefully, like every motion cost her something. "The last girl we hired to help with cooking burned water. Somehow. I still don't understand how that's possible." "It ain't." Clara set a plate before her. "She just didn't care enough to learn." "And you do?" Clara paused, considering the question seriously. "I care about earning my keep, ma'am. I care about proving I'm worth the train ticket you sent. And I care about making sure you eat proper, because from what I can see, you ain't been doing that." Harriet looked down at the plate eggs, cooked soft bacon, crisp biscuits, golden and steaming. Her eyes glistened. "My husband used to make biscuits like these," she said quietly. "Haven't had any this good since he passed." "Then eat up. There's more where that came from." They ate together in comfortable silence, and Clara felt something loosen in her chest. This at least she could do. This at least she understood. Silas appeared in the doorway just as Clara was clearing the plates. He filled the frame the way he always did, blocking out the light, making the room feel smaller simply by being in it. His eyes swept over the kitchen, taking in the warmth, the order, the evidence of productive activity. "Coffee's on the stove," Clara said without looking at him. "Biscuits in the warmer. I saved you a plate." She felt rather than saw his surprise. "You didn't have to do that." "I know." She finally met his eyes. "I wanted to." Something flickered in those gray depths, gone before she could name it. Silas crossed to the stove, poured himself coffee, and stood there drinking it in silence. Clara went back to washing dishes, acutely aware of his presence behind her. "The biscuits are good," he said finally. It wasn't much. 3 words. But Clara had learned to read the spaces between words, the things men said with their silences and their actions. "Thank you," she said simply. Silas set down his cup and headed for the door. He paused with his hand on the frame. Jack says you didn't complain once on the ride from town. 12 miles in that cold. Clara shrugged. What good would complaining do? Most folks do it anyway. I ain't most folks. Silas was quiet for a long moment, then so softly she almost missed it. No, I reckon you ain't. And then he was gone, his heavy footsteps fading across the porch. Harriet was watching her with a strange expression. What? Clara asked. Nothing. But there was a smile playing at the corners of Harriet's mouth. Nothing at all. The days fell into a rhythm. Clara took over the household accounts and discovered they were more disorganized than she'd expected. Harriet's failing health had left gaps payments, missed orders, forgotten records incomplete. She spent hours untangling the mess, establishing new systems, making sure nothing fell through the cracks. She worked alongside Ruth Hollis Jack's wife, learning the particular demands of a frontier household. How to preserve meat for the long winter. How to stretch supplies when the snow made travel impossible. How to manage a house that was both a home and the headquarters of a working ranch. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, she began to earn respect. Murphy noticed first. The accounts look better than they have in years, he told Silas one evening loud enough for Clara to hear from the kitchen. That woman's got a head for numbers. The ranch hands noticed next. Clara made sure there was always hot coffee ready when they came in from the cold, always food waiting after long days of work. Small things, but small things mattered. Even Mrs. Crawford, the sharp-tongued widow from the neighboring ranch, who stopped by to check on Harriet, grudgingly admitted that the new girl seems competent enough. From Agnes Crawford, that was practically a declaration of love. But Silas remained distant. He joined meals without being summoned now, which was progress. He answered questions with more than grunts, which was more progress. But there was still a wall between them, thick and high and seemingly impenetrable. Clara didn't push. She watched. She waited. She learned. She learned that Silas checked on his mother 3 times a day, even when work demanded his attention elsewhere. She learned that he was gentle with the horses, speaking to them in low, soothing tones that transformed his harsh voice into something almost tender. She learned that he stayed up late reading by the fire, working through a collection of books that had belonged to his father. And she learned about the nightmares. The first time it happened, she thought the house was under attack. She woke to shouting to the sound of a man in agony, and for one terrified moment, she was back in Philadelphia, back in the tenement, where violence was as common as breathing. Then she realized the sounds were coming from down the hall, from Silas's room. Clara threw back her covers and ran. She found him tangled in his sheets, his massive body rigid, his hands clenched into fists that struck at invisible enemies. Sweat poured down his face. His eyes were open, but unseeing, locked in some private hell. Daniel. The name tore from his throat like a wound. Daniel run Daniel. Clara didn't think. She simply acted. She grabbed his arm, gripping as hard as she could, and shouted his name. Silas, Silas, wake up. You're dreaming. He came awake with a violent start. His hand shot out and grabbed her wrist, the grip crushing, and for one terrible instant, his eyes were wild with something that looked like murder. Then, recognition flooded back. His grip loosened immediately. His chest heaved with ragged breaths. Clara! Her name came out broken. I'm sorry. Did I hurt you? No. It wasn't entirely true. Her wrist ached where he'd grabbed her, but she wasn't about to tell him that. You were dreaming. I know. Silas closed his eyes. In the dim light from the hallway, she could see him fighting to regain control. It happens sometimes. How often? Often enough. Clara sat on the edge of his bed studying his profile. The scar stood out starkly against his pale skin. He looked in that moment more vulnerable than she had ever seen him. Do you want to talk about it? No. Silas? I said no. The words came out harsh, and he flinched at his own tone. "I'm sorry. I can't. Not yet." Clara nodded slowly. "All right. Not yet." She started to rise, but something made her stop. Some instinct she couldn't name. Instead of leaving, she reached across the darkness and found his hand. His fingers were cold, trembling slightly. She held on. For a long moment, Silas didn't move. Then slowly his fingers closed around hers. They sat like that until dawn began to gray the windows, connected by that single point of contact. Not speaking, just being. When Clara finally rose to start breakfast, Silas's voice stopped her at the door. "Clara." She turned. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For staying." Clara nodded and slipped out into the hallway. It wasn't much, but it was something. 2 weeks after Clara's arrival, Harriet called them both into the main room. She was sitting in her rocking chair, as always, wrapped in her shawls, her Bible open in her lap. But there was a new fragility to her movements today, a grayness to her skin that Clara had never seen before. Her heart clenched with sudden fear. "Sit," Harriet said. "Both of you." They sat. Clara in her usual chair, Silas in his. The fire crackled between them, filling the silence. Harriet looked at them with eyes that held both love and urgency. "I don't have much time left. We all know it." She held up a hand to stop Silas's protest. "Don't argue with me, son. I need to see you married before I go." Clara's heart lurched. She glanced at Silas, but his face was unreadable. "Mother," he began. "I've watched you both these past weeks," Harriet continued. "You're not in love. I ain't foolish enough to believe that, but there's something there, something worth building on." Silence stretched through the room. "I'm not asking for promises of eternal devotion," Harriet said. "I'm asking for a chance, a real marriage, a partnership. Someone to stand beside you when I'm gone, Silas." Silas's jaw worked. His hands gripped the arms of his chair until his knuckles went white. "When?" he asked finally. Harriet's face flooded with relief. "The minister can come tomorrow." "Tomorrow." Clara's voice came out higher than she intended. "Time ain't something I got much of, child." Harriet's eyes found hers. "Will you marry my son? Will you give an old woman peace before she meets her maker?" Clara looked at Silas. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't read. "Is this what you want?" she asked him directly. For a long moment he didn't answer. Then, "I want my mother to die in peace. I want someone to share the burden of this ranch. And I want—" He paused, struggling. "I want to try. That's all I can promise. That I'll try." It wasn't a declaration of love. It wasn't even particularly romantic. But it was honest. And honesty, Clara had learned, was worth more than pretty words. "Yes," she said quietly. "I'll marry you." The wedding took place the next afternoon in the main room before the great stone fireplace. Minister Weller had ridden 12 miles through bitter cold to perform the ceremony. He was a thin, nervous man who kept glancing at Silas as if expecting the giant to attack at any moment. Clara wore a blue wool dress that Harriet had insisted on giving her, simple but beautiful, altered to fit her slender frame. It was the finest thing she had ever worn. Silas stood beside her in his cleanest clothes, freshly shaved, his dark hair combed back from his scarred face. He looked, Clara thought, like a man facing execution rather than marriage. The ceremony was brief. Minister Weller spoke the words with chattering teeth, rushing through the vows as if speed would protect him from the intimidating groom. "Do you, Silas James Garrett, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." His voice was steady at least. "Do you, Clara May Sutton, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Clara looked up at Silas, so far up, given their difference in height, and saw the fear beneath his stoic facade. He was as scared as she was. Maybe more. "I do," she said. The ring he slipped onto her finger was a simple gold band, worn smooth by generations of Garrett brides. His grandmother's, his mother's, now hers. You may kiss the bride. The moment stretched. Silas looked down at her uncertainty written in every line of his face. This wasn't a love match. They both knew it. A kiss seemed almost like a lie. But Harriet was watching, tears streaming down her cheeks, hope shining in her dying eyes. Clara rose on her toes, placed her hands on Silas's chest for balance, and pressed her lips briefly to his. It was over in an instant. A brush of warmth. Nothing more. But when she pulled back, she saw something flicker in Silas's expression. Surprise, maybe. Or the faintest shadow of something deeper. I now pronounce you man and wife, Minister Weller said, snapping his Bible closed with obvious relief. And just like that, Clara Sutton became Clara Garrett. That night, after the modest celebration had ended and the minister had fled back to town, Silas led Clara to their bedroom. Their bedroom. The words felt strange in her mind. The room was large, dominated by an enormous bed that could have fit 4 people comfortably. A fire burned low in the hearth. Heavy curtains blocked the winter darkness outside. Clara stood in the doorway, suddenly unable to move. Silas noticed. He always noticed she was beginning to realize. He saw more than he let on. Clara. He said her name carefully, like he was testing how it felt. I need you to understand something. She looked up at him, waiting. I ain't going to touch you. The words hung in the air. Not tonight, Silas continued. Not until you want me to. Maybe not ever if that's what you choose. Clara blinked. I don't understand. This marriage, it's for my mother, so she can die knowing I won't be alone. His jaw tightened. I won't take anything from you that you don't freely give. I won't demand anything. You're safe with me, Clara. I need you to know that. Something shifted in Clara's chest. All her life she had been told what she was worth, what she could expect, what she deserved. No man had ever asked what she wanted. Thank you, she whispered. Silas nodded stiffly. I'll sleep on the floor. You will not. He turned surprised. That bed is big enough for both of us to sleep without touching, Clara said, finding her voice. And it's freezing. You'll catch your death on the floor. I've slept in worse places. I don't doubt it. But you ain't sleeping on the floor of your own bedroom on your wedding night. That's ridiculous. For a long moment, Silas just stared at her. Then unexpectedly, the corner of his mouth twitched. You're stubborn, he said. I prefer determined. Stubborn. But there was something almost like warmth in his voice. They prepared for bed in awkward silence, each taking turns looking away while the other changed. When they finally climbed into the massive bed, they clung to opposite edges, the distance between them vast as an ocean. Clara lay rigid beneath the blankets, acutely aware of his presence. His breathing, his warmth, the weight of him making the mattress dip. Good night, Clara, he said quietly. Good night, Silas. She closed her eyes and waited for sleep. It was a long time coming. The weeks that followed settled into a new pattern. Clara continued her work managing the household, but now she did so as wife rather than guest. The title felt strange. She had never been a wife to anyone, but the work itself was grounding. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, Silas began to change. It started with small things. He began holding her chair at meals, asking about her day, saying her name more often, Clara, 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 as if the sound of it was something he needed to practice. He started joining her in the kitchen in the early mornings, sitting at the table with coffee while she cooked breakfast. They didn't always talk, but the silence between them was comfortable now. Easy. One morning, about 3 weeks after the wedding, Silas spoke without prompting. My father built this house with his own hands. Clara looked up from the bacon she was frying. Silas was staring into his coffee, his massive shoulders hunched. He came out here with nothing, just a horse and a dream, and more stubbornness than sense. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Ma used to say that's where I got it from. The stubbornness. Among other things. Silas finally met her eyes. He died when I was 20. Heart gave out. Worked himself to death, Ma said. But he left us this place. Left us something that mattered. Clara set down her spatula and moved to sit across from him. Tell me about him. And Silas did. He talked for nearly an hour, words pouring out of him like water from a dam. He told her about James Garrett's booming laugh, his enormous hands that could be gentle as a whisper, his unwavering belief that a man's worth was measured by how he treated those weaker than himself. He would have liked you, Silas said finally. Pa, he always had a soft spot for survivors. Clara felt warmth spread through her chest. I would have liked him too. Silas nodded slowly. Then, with visible effort, he asked, What about your father? Clara's throat tightened. She had spent so many years trying to forget, but something about Silas's openness made her want to speak. He was a shoemaker, she said softly. Had a little shop in Philadelphia, nothing fancy, but he made beautiful things with his hands. She looked down at her own hands, calloused from work, scarred from a lifetime of hard labor. He used to make me dolls out of scraps of leather, little animals with button eyes. I loved them more than anything in the world. What happened to him? His lungs. Clara swallowed hard. The leather dust, the factory fumes. He just faded. One day he couldn't get out of bed, and 3 weeks later he was gone. Silas was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached across the table and covered her hand with his. His palm was rough, enormous, warm. I'm sorry, he said simply. Clara looked up at him, this scarred giant who had seemed so cold when she first arrived, and saw something she hadn't expected. Understanding. Real, genuine understanding. I'm sorry too, she said. About Daniel. About everything you lost. His hand tightened on hers, just for a moment. Then he pulled back and stood. I should get to work. Silas. He paused at the door. Thank you, Clara said, for telling me about your father. He nodded once, then he was gone. But something had shifted between them. Clara felt it like a change in the weather. The walls were starting to crack. Harriet died on a quiet Tuesday morning in early February. The end came peacefully, which was more than most could hope for. She had spent her last evening surrounded by family, Silas holding one hand, Clara holding the other, Jack and Ruth standing vigil by the door. She had smiled at her son and whispered words that Clara couldn't hear, private words, final words, and then she had closed her eyes and simply let go. Silas didn't cry at the funeral. He stood like a statue beside the grave, his scarred face carved from stone, his gray eyes empty. The minister's words seemed to float away on the bitter wind, meaningless sounds that couldn't begin to capture the life they were saying goodbye to. Clara stood beside him close enough that their shoulders touched. She didn't speak, didn't offer empty comfort, just remained present. After the mourners had returned to the house, after the grave had been covered with frozen earth, Clara found Silas in the barn. He was standing before his horse Shadow, a massive black stallion that was one of the few creatures large enough to carry him. His forehead rested against the horse's neck. His massive body trembled. Clara approached quietly and placed her hand on his back. She loved you so much, she said softly. Her last thought was of you. I know. His voice was raw, shattered. She told me, the night before. She said she was grateful. Grateful she could go in peace because she knew I wouldn't be alone. You won't be. I'm here. Silas turned to look at her. His eyes were red, his face drawn with grief. Why? He asked. Why do you stay? You don't owe me anything. You could leave. Take some money and go somewhere warm. Start a new life without all this." He gestured vaguely. "Without all this darkness." Clara considered the question. "When I first came here," she said slowly, "I thought I was doing your mother a favor, a mail-order bride fulfilling a desperate request. I thought I would work hard and earn my keep, and maybe if I was lucky, find some security." She paused. "But then I met you, and you were nothing like what I expected. I was worse. You were real." Clara held his gaze. "You were broken and scared just like me, fighting battles nobody else could see just like me. And somewhere along the way, I stopped thinking about security." "What did you start thinking about?" Clara reached up and touched his face, her fingers tracing the line of his scar. "You," she said simply. "I started thinking about you." Silas caught her hand, pressing it against his cheek. "I don't deserve that." "Maybe not, but that ain't for you to decide." For a long moment, he simply looked at her. This small, fierce woman who had walked into his life and refused to leave. Then slowly, deliberately, he bent down and kissed her. This kiss was nothing like the brief peck at their wedding. It was deep and searching, full of grief and need and desperate hope. Clara felt his pain in it, his loneliness, his terrible fear of losing anyone else. But she also felt something else, something that flickered like a flame trying to catch in the darkness. When they finally broke apart, both of them were trembling. "I don't know how to do this," Silas said. "Neither do I." Clara looked up at him. "But I'm willing to learn if you are." The wind howled outside the barn. The horses shifted in their stalls. And somewhere in the depths of winter, something new began to grow. "I'm willing to try," Silas said quietly. "That's all I can promise." "That's enough." Clara took his hand. "For now, that's enough." They walked back to the house together, their fingers intertwined, leaving the cold behind them. And for the first time since she'd arrived in Montana, Clara allowed herself to believe that this might actually work. That night, lying in their shared bed, Silas reached for her in the darkness. Not with desire, not with demand, just reaching, searching for connection. Clara moved closer, resting her head on his chest, feeling his heartbeat beneath her cheek. "Tell me about Daniel," she whispered. And this time Silas did. He talked until the sky began to lighten, about his brother's laugh, his reckless courage, his absolute faith that the world was fundamentally good despite all evidence to the contrary. "He was better than me in every way," Silas said. "Smarter, kinder. Everyone loved Daniel." "What happened that day?" The silence stretched so long Clara thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "We were tracking cattle thieves. They'd been hitting ranches across the territory for months. We finally got a lead on where they were hiding." His voice went flat, mechanical. "My horse threw a shoe. I had to stop. Daniel said he'd go ahead and scout the location. Said I worried too much." Silas's chest heaved. "By the time I caught up, Marcus Brennan had already... He couldn't finish. Clara held him tighter. "You couldn't have known. I should have made him wait. I should have been there. If I'd been there, you'd probably be dead too." The words hung in the darkness. "Maybe that would have been better," Silas whispered. Clara pushed herself up, forcing him to meet her eyes. "Don't say that. Don't ever say that." "Clara, your mother spent her last months on this earth trying to save you, trying to give you a reason to live. Are you going to tell me that was wasted, that she died for nothing?" Silas flinched. "I killed Marcus Brennan," he said. "I tracked him across 3 territories. I put a bullet through his skull while he was still laughing about what he'd done." His jaw tightened. "It didn't bring Daniel back. Nothing could. But it stopped Brennan from hurting anyone else." Clara placed her hand over his heart. You protected other families from the same pain. That matters, Silas. That counts for something." He was quiet for a long time. "How do you do that?" he asked finally. "Do what?" "Find the light, even in all this darkness." He touched her face with wondering fingers. "How do you keep hoping when everything tells you hope is foolish?" Clara considered the question. "Because the alternative is giving up. And I ain't built for giving up." She smiled slightly. "Neither are you, whether you know it yet or not." Silas pulled her back down against his chest, holding her like she was the only solid thing in a world of shadows. "Stay with me," he murmured. "Please, just stay." "I ain't going anywhere," Clara promised. "I'm right here. I'll be right here." Outside, the winter wind continued to howl, but inside the walls of Stone Creek Ranch, something warm was growing. Something that felt against all odds like the beginning of home. The weeks following Harriet's death brought changes Clara hadn't expected. Silas didn't retreat behind his walls. He didn't shut her out. Instead, he seemed to open up more, not dramatically, because Silas Garrett was not a man given to dramatic gestures, but in small, quiet ways that meant everything. He started joining her in the kitchen every morning without being asked. He began sharing stories about his past, not just the painful ones, but the lighter memories too. He laughed more. Not often, but enough that Clara learned to recognize the sound rusty and unpracticed, like a door that hadn't been opened in years. And he touched her. Nothing improper, nothing demanding, just small points of contact throughout the day. His hand on her back as he passed, his fingers brushing hers when she handed him his coffee. The way he'd tuck a stray strand of hair behind her ear without seeming to realize he was doing it. "You're staring," Clara said one evening, looking up from her mending to find Silas watching her from his chair by the fire. "Am I?" "You are." He didn't look away. "I'm trying to figure something out." "What's that?" "How someone so small can fill up so much space." Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I don't know what you mean." "Before you came, this house was empty. Even when Ma was here, even when the hands came in for meals, it was empty." Silas leaned forward, his gray eyes intent on her face. "Now it ain't, and you're the only thing that changed." Clara set down her sewing, her heart beating faster than it should. "Silas, I know I ain't good with words." He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "I know I don't say the things I should, but I want you to know." He stopped struggling. "Know what?" "That I'm glad you came. That I'm glad you stayed." His voice dropped. "That I don't know what I'd do if you left." Clara rose from her chair and crossed to him. She stood before him, close enough to touch, looking down at his upturned face. "I ain't leaving," she said softly. "I told you that." "I know what you told me, but telling and meaning ain't always the same thing." "They are for me." Silas reached up and took her hand, pulling her down until she was sitting on the arm of his chair. His massive body radiated warmth, and Clara found herself leaning into it without thinking. "I don't deserve you," he said quietly. "You keep saying that." "Because it's true." Clara placed her hand on his cheek, feeling the rough stubble beneath her palm, the ridge of his scar against her fingers. "Maybe it is. Maybe it ain't." She held his gaze. "But I'm here anyway. What are you going to do about it?" Something shifted in Silas's expression. The careful control he always maintained seemed to crack just for a moment. Then he kissed her. Not like the wedding kiss, brief and awkward and performative. This kiss was real. Deep, full of everything he couldn't put into words. Clara's hands found their way to his shoulders, his neck, his hair. She kissed him back with equal fervor, pouring all her own unspoken feelings into the contact. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. "I've been wanting to do that for weeks," Silas admitted, his voice rough. "What took you so long?" He laughed, that rusty, wonderful sound, and pulled her fully into his lap, wrapping his arms around her like he never intended to let go. "Didn't want to scare you off." "Silas Garrett." Clara touched his face again, marveling at how natural it felt. After everything I've survived, you think a kiss is gonna scare me? Fair point. He pressed his forehead to hers. I ain't good at this, Clara. Feelings. Talking about feelings. Being close to someone. I noticed. But I want to learn. With you. He pulled back to look at her. If you'll teach me. Clara smiled a real smile, the kind she hadn't allowed herself in years. I reckon I can manage that. They sat together until the fire burned low, talking and not talking, learning the shape of this new thing between them. And when they finally went to bed, Clara didn't cling to the far edge of the mattress. She curled into Silas's side, her head on his chest, and slept better than she had in her entire life. Spring arrived slowly, fighting through the last stubborn remnants of winter. The snow began to melt. The cattle needed attention. The ranch demanded every hour of every day. But Silas made time for Clara. He started taking her riding despite her protests that she barely knew how to sit a horse. He taught her to shoot. Everyone out here needs to know how to handle a gun, and was patient when her first dozen shots went wide. He showed her the boundaries of the property, the hidden valleys and secret springs, the places where his father had first dreamed of building something that would last. It's beautiful, Clara said one afternoon, looking out over a meadow just beginning to green. All of it. Silas stood behind her, his hands on her shoulders. It'll be yours someday, when I'm gone. Clara turned to face him. Don't talk like that. I ain't being morbid, just practical. His expression was serious. The land passes to the wife if there ain't any children. That's how Pa set it up. So if anything happens to me, nothing's going to happen to you. Clara. I said nothing. She gripped his shirt, pulling him down until his face was level with hers. You hear me, Silas Garrett? You ain't allowed to die. I didn't come all the way to Montana to be a widow. Something flickered in his eyes. Amusement, maybe, or tenderness. Yes, ma'am. I mean it. I know you do. He kissed her forehead. That's what I love about you. Clara's breath caught. What did you say? Silas froze. The word had slipped out unplanned, unexpected. He stepped back, his face closing off. I didn't mean... Yes, you did. Clara followed him, refusing to let him retreat. Say it again. Clara. Say it. He stared at her for a long moment. Then so quietly she almost missed it. I love you. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. That's the first time you've said that. I know. Did you mean it? I don't say things I don't mean. His voice was rough with emotion. I love you, Clara. I didn't want to. I tried not to, but I can't seem to help it. Clara laughed even as the tears spilled down her cheeks. You tried not to love me. I tried not to love anyone. Ever again. Silas's face was raw, open, vulnerable in a way she'd never seen. Everyone I love gets hurt. Everyone I care about ends up dead. I thought if I just stayed alone, if I kept everyone away. But you couldn't keep me away. No. He shook his head slowly. You're too damn stubborn. Clara reached up and pulled his face down to hers. I love you too, she whispered against his lips. I love you, Silas. Scars and nightmares and all. She kissed him, then there in the meadow with the spring wind swirling around them, and felt something click into place in her chest. A piece she hadn't known was missing. This was home. This man, this land, this life. This was where she belonged. The warning sign started 3 days later. Jack came in from town with a troubled expression, pulling Silas aside for a conversation Clara couldn't hear. She watched them through the kitchen window, watched Silas's face go hard, his shoulders tense, his hands clench into fists. When he came inside, his eyes were cold again. Distant. The walls she'd worked so hard to breach were slamming back into place. What is it? Clara demanded. What's wrong? Nothing. Don't lie to me. I can see it in your face. Silas was quiet for a long moment. Then, Jack heard some talk in town. Strangers asking questions about Stone Creek, about me. Clara's blood chilled. What kind of strangers? The dangerous kind. Silas moved to the window, staring out at the land that had been in his family for generations. Men with guns, hard eyes, asking where I live, asking about my habits. Who are they? Don't know yet. Could be nothing. Lot of drifters pass through this time of year. But his voice didn't sound like he believed that. 2 days later, another fence was cut. A dozen cattle wandered off. 2 were found slaughtered, the meat left to rot. It's a message, Jack said grimly. Somebody's making a point. What point? Clara asked. Nobody answered. Then one of the young ranch hands, Billy, barely 19, with a quick smile and freckles across his nose, got jumped on his way back from town. Beat so bad he couldn't walk for 3 days. When he could finally talk, he said there were 4 of them. They didn't take his money, didn't take his horse, just hurt him and told him to give a message to his boss. What message? Silas's voice was deadly quiet. Billy's face was a mass of bruises, one eye swollen completely shut. They said you killed their brother. They said blood pays for blood. The room went still. Clara watched Silas's face drain of color. Brother, he repeated. They said, brother. Yes, sir. Did they give a name? Billy nodded miserably. Brennan. They said their name was Brennan. Silas didn't move, didn't speak. But Clara saw his hands trembling, and she knew. The past had finally caught up with them. That night, after Billy had been tended to, and the hands had been sent to double the watch, Clara found Silas in the barn. He was saddling Shadow, his movements quick and angry. Where do you think you're going? To end this. By yourself against God knows how many men. I ain't gonna sit here and wait for them to pick us off one by one. Silas yanked the cinch tight. I ain't gonna watch people get hurt because of something I did 8 years ago. So you're gonna ride out there alone and get yourself killed. That's your plan. If that's what it takes. Clara grabbed his arm, spinning him to face her. Listen to me, Silas Garrett. You ain't doing this alone. You hear me? Clara, no! Her voice shook with fury and fear. You don't get to do this. You don't get to tell me you love me and then ride off to die. That ain't how this works. I'm trying to protect you. By leaving me a widow, by making sure I spend the rest of my life wondering if there was something I could have done. Silas's face crumpled. The anger drained out of him, replaced by something that looked like despair. I can't lose you, he whispered. I can't. If something happened to you because of me, because of my past, then that would be my choice. Clara gripped his face in both hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. My risk to take. You don't get to make that decision for me. I can't watch you die, Clara. I can't watch anyone else I love die. Then don't. She pulled him close, holding on tight. Stay alive. Fight smart. Let the people who care about you help. Silas buried his face in her hair. His massive body shook with emotions too powerful to contain. I'm scared, he admitted. I ain't felt scared in 8 years. Not since Daniel. But right now I'm terrified. Good. Clara pulled back to look at him. Fear means you got something worth fighting for. You. Us. She smiled through her own tears. We face this together, whatever comes. You promised to try, remember. This is part of trying. Silas was quiet for a long moment. Then slowly he began unsaddling Shadow. Together, he agreed. But Clara, if things go bad, if it looks like we're gonna lose, don't. Listen to me. His voice was urgent. If things go bad, I need you to run. Don't try to fight. Don't try to help. Just run. Silas, promise me. His hands gripped her shoulders. I can't do what needs doing if I'm worried about you. I need to know you'll be safe. Clara wanted to argue, wanted to tell him she wasn't the kind of woman who ran. But she saw the fear in his eyes. Not for himself, for her. "I promise," she said quietly. Silas's shoulders sagged with relief. He pulled her into his arms and held her like she was the most precious thing in the world. "I love you," he murmured. "God help me, I love you so much." "I love you too." Clara clung to him. "Now let's go figure out how to survive this." The letter arrived 2 days later. Clara was sorting through the mail when she found it expensive paper, careful handwriting, each letter formed with almost obsessive precision. Something about it made her skin crawl. She brought it to Silas without opening it. He studied the envelope for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then he slid it open and read. Clara watched his expression shift from wariness to cold fury. "What does it say?" Silas's voice was flat, emotionless. "It's from Cole Brennan, Marcus's younger brother." "What does he want?" "My life." Silas crumpled the letter in his fist. "He says he's going to kill everyone I care about and make me watch. Then he's going to kill me slow the way he thinks Silas should have killed Daniel." Clara's blood ran cold. "When?" "He doesn't say. That's the point. Wants me jumping at shadows, exhausted and paranoid before he makes his move." "What are we going to do?" Silas looked at her and she saw something harden in his gray eyes. The grief and vulnerability of the past weeks had burned away, replaced by something older, darker. The man who had tracked Marcus Brennan across 3 territories and put him down like a rabid dog. "We're gonna prepare," he said quietly. "Double the guards, fortify the house, make sure everyone knows what to do when the time comes." "And when it does come?" Silas's jaw tightened. "Then I end this. Once and for all." The next week was chaos. Silas implemented new security measures across the ranch. Armed guards patrolled day and night. The hands were issued weapons and trained in their use. The main house was reinforced shutters over windows, escape routes, planned supplies stockpiled. Clara threw herself into the preparations. She organized food and medical supplies, coordinated with Ruth Hollis and Agnes Crawford, made sure everyone knew their role. "You're good at this," Ruth said one afternoon, watching Clara inventory the root cellar. "Keeping calm when everything's falling apart." "Had a lot of practice." Clara marked another item off her list. "You don't survive poverty in Philadelphia without learning to stay steady in a crisis." "Jack says Silas is different since you came. More human." Clara paused. "Is that what he says?" "He says Silas laughs now. Didn't laugh once in 8 years after Daniel died. Not once." Ruth's eyes were warm. "You're good for him." "He's good for me too." "That's how it should be." Ruth squeezed her arm. "That's how a real marriage works." That night, Clara and Silas lay together in the darkness, neither of them sleeping. His arms were wrapped around her, her back pressed against his chest, their fingers intertwined. "Tell me about Cole Brennan," Clara said quietly. Silas was silent for a moment. "He's Marcus's younger brother, smarter than Marcus was, more patient. Jack said he was in prison. Wyoming, armed robbery. He got out about 8 months ago." Silas's voice was grim. "If he's been planning this that long, he's not going to make mistakes." "What kind of man is he?" "I don't know, never met him. But Marcus was vicious and stupid. Cole sounds vicious and smart." His arms tightened around her. "That's a dangerous combination. How many men does he have?" "Jack thinks 30, maybe more. All of them hard cases. Outlaws, drifters, men with nothing to lose." Clara did the math in her head. Stone Creek had maybe 15 men who could fight. Half that number against twice as many enemies. "We're outnumbered." "Yes." "Can we win?" Silas was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was carefully neutral. "We can make them pay. Make it cost more than it's worth." "That's not what I asked." "I know." He pressed his lips to her hair. "I know." They lay in silence, listening to the wind outside the creak of the old house, settling the distant sounds of the guards on patrol. "I ain't sorry," Silas said finally. "For what?" "For killing Marcus. For what I did 8 years ago." His voice was fierce. "He murdered Daniel. He deserved what he got, and if I had to do it again, I would." "I know. But I am sorry for what it's costing now. For putting you in danger. For bringing this down on people who had nothing to do with it." Clara turned in his arms to face him. In the darkness, she could barely see his features, but she could feel his tension, his fear, his guilt. "Listen to me," she said firmly. "You did what any man would do, what any good man would do. You protected your family. You brought justice to someone who deserved it. And now his brother is a murderer and a coward who beats up boys half his age and slaughters cattle to make a point." Clara's voice hardened. "He ain't seeking justice. He's seeking revenge. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Yes. Justice is about making things right. Revenge is about making someone else hurt." She touched his face. "You didn't hunt Marcus down to make him hurt. You did it to stop him from hurting anyone else." Silas was quiet, absorbing this. "How do you do that?" he asked finally. "Do what?" "Find the right words, the ones that make sense of things." Clara smiled in the darkness. "Had a lot of practice talking myself through hard times. When you ain't got nobody else, you learn to be your own comfort. You got me now." "I know." She kissed him softly. "And you got me. Whatever happens, you got me." Silas pulled her close, holding on like she was the only solid thing in a world coming apart at the seams. "I love you, Clara Garrett. I love you too, Silas. Whatever happens tomorrow, stop." She put her fingers over his lips. "Don't say goodbye. Don't you dare. We're gonna get through this. Both of us. Together." "Together," he echoed. Outside, the wind picked up, howling through the eaves like a warning. The guards called to each other across the darkness. Somewhere in the night, Cole Brennan and his men were waiting, planning, preparing to strike. But here in this room, in this bed, Clara held on to her husband and refused to be afraid. They had come too far, survived too much. They weren't going to lose now, not without one hell of a fight. The attack came 3 nights later. Silas had left at dawn for a cattle drive that couldn't be postponed. Buyers were waiting at the railhead, and the ranch needed the money. He'd kissed Clara with unusual intensity before riding out, his gray eyes dark with worry. "I'll be back in 2 days," he'd promised. "Jack will stay with you. The guards know what to do." "I know. If anything happens, it won't." He'd looked at her for a long moment, memorizing her face, and Clara had felt a chill run down her spine. "I love you," he said. "I love you too. Now go. Sooner you leave, sooner you'll be back." She'd watched him ride away until he disappeared over the horizon. Then she'd turned back to the house and tried to ignore the knot of dread in her stomach. She never suspected she'd just said goodbye. Clara woke to gunfire. Sharp cracks split the peaceful darkness, and for one confused moment, she thought she was dreaming. Then more shots came, followed by screaming horses, cattlemen shouting orders and warnings. She threw back the covers and ran to the window. Fire. The barn was burning. Flames licked at the night sky, sending up showers of sparks. She could see figures moving in the chaos, some running toward the fire, others running away. And beneath it all, the steady crack of rifles. Clara's first instinct was to run outside to help, to do something. But Silas's voice echoed in her memory. "If things go bad, run. Don't try to help, just run." She'd promised. But as she watched the flames spread, as she heard the sounds of battle intensifying, she realized running was no longer an option. They were surrounded. The door burst open, and Clara spun around with a scream that died when she saw Jack. His face was streaked with blood and soot. His arm hung at an odd angle. "They're everywhere," he gasped. "Must be 30 men. Hit the bunkhouse first. Took out half our guards before we knew what was happening." "What do we do?" "There's a cellar. Hidden entrance in the kitchen. Mrs. Garrett, the first, Mrs. Garrett, she had it built years ago." Jack grabbed her arm with his good hand. "If we can get you there." "What about you? What about the others?" "We'll hold them off as long as we can. Buy you time." "Jack, no. This ain't a debate." The old foreman's eyes were fierce. "Silas would never forgive me if I let something happen to you, and I wouldn't forgive myself." He started pulling her toward the kitchen. They made it halfway across the main room before the front door exploded inward. Men poured through the opening. Rough, hard-faced men with guns drawn and murder in their eyes. Jack shoved Clara behind him and raised his weapon, but he managed only one shot before a bullet caught him in the shoulder and sent him spinning to the ground. "Jack!" Clara dropped to her knees beside him, pressing her hands against the wound as blood seeped through her fingers. "Run!" he gasped. "Clara, run!" But it was too late. A boot connected with her ribs, sending her sprawling across the floor. Pain exploded through her side. She looked up through tears to see a man standing over her. Tall, lean, with a face that might have been handsome if not for the cruelty twisting his features. He had the same cold eyes she'd seen in her nightmares, the same smile of a predator who had cornered his prey. "Well, well." Cole Brennan's voice was soft, almost pleasant. "The giant's little bride. Ain't much to look at, are you?" Clara said nothing. She couldn't speak through the terror closing around her throat. Cole crouched down beside her, studying her face with detached interest. "My brother told me about Silas Garrett. Before he died, I mean. Told me how the giant tracked him down. How he put a bullet through his brain without so much as a trial." Cole tilted his head. "Told me how Daniel Garrett screamed when Marcus cut him. How he begged for mercy." Clara forced herself to meet his eyes. "Daniel Garrett was a good man. Your brother was a monster." The slap came so fast she didn't see it. Her head snapped to the side and she tasted blood. "My brother was the only family I had." Cole's voice stayed soft, conversational. "And your husband took him from me. Now I'm going to take everything from him." He smiled that terrible smile. "Starting with you." He stood and gestured to his men. "Tie her up. We're going to wait for the giant to come home. And when he does..." Cole laughed. "We're going to show him what real suffering looks like." Clara was hauled to her feet, her hands bound behind her back with rough rope that bit into her wrists. She caught a glimpse of Jack being dragged away still alive, thank God, before a hood was thrown over her head, and darkness swallowed everything. They took her outside into the chaos of the burning ranch. She could hear the flames, smell the smoke, feel the heat on her skin even through the hood. Men shouted orders around her. Horses screamed in terror. And somewhere in the distance, she heard the sounds of fighting the remaining ranch hands making their last stand. Clara stumbled over rough ground as her captors dragged her along. Her feet were bare, she'd had no time to grab shoes, and the frozen earth bit into her skin like teeth. Think, she commanded herself. Think. Silas would come. As soon as word reached him, he'd come racing back. And he'd ride straight into Cole's trap. Unless she warned him. Unless she got free. The hood made it hard to breathe, hard to think. But Clara forced herself to focus on what she could feel. The rope around her wrists. The men's hands on her arms, the ground beneath her feet. They'd tied her hands behind her back, but the knot felt sloppy. Rushed. These were violent men, not careful ones. She began working at the rope, small movements hidden by the darkness. They stopped moving, and Clara was shoved to her knees on hard-packed earth. The hood was ripped from her head, and she blinked against the sudden glare of torchlight. She was in the yard between the main house and the burning barn. Bodies lay scattered across the ground. She recognized Billy, the young hand who'd been beaten before lying motionless near the fence. Her stomach heaved, but she forced the bile down. Not now. She couldn't break down now. Cole Brennan stood a few feet away, directing his men with casual efficiency. In the firelight, his face was a mask of cold satisfaction. "Put the survivors in the smokehouse," he ordered. "Anyone who can still hold a gun goes in chains. The rest use your judgment." "What about her?" One of the outlaws gestured at Clara with his rifle. Cole turned, and that terrible smile spread across his face. "She stays with me. The giant's bride is going to be our special guest." He crossed to where she knelt and crouched down to her level. "You're thinking," he observed. "I can see it in your eyes. Trying to figure out how to escape. How to warn your husband." Clara said nothing. "Smart. Marcus always said Garrett was clever. Figured his woman would be too." Cole gripped her chin, forcing her to meet his gaze. "But here's the thing, little bride. There ain't no escape. There ain't no rescue. Your giant is going to come riding in here thinking he can save you, and I'm going to cut him apart piece by piece while you watch." "He'll kill you." Clara's voice came out steadier than she expected. "Whatever else happens, he'll kill you." Cole laughed. "Maybe. But he'll have to watch you die first. And that's going to break him." His grip tightened painfully. "An eye for an eye, Mrs. Garrett. Blood for blood. That's justice out here." "That ain't justice. That's revenge." "Same thing." "No." Clara held his gaze. "Justice is about making things right. Revenge is about making someone hurt. Your brother wasn't seeking justice when he killed Daniel Garrett. He was a murderer and a coward, just like you." For a moment, something flickered in Cole's eyes. Doubt, maybe, or rage. Then he laughed again, cold and humorless, and released her chin. "Brave words for a woman on her knees." He stood and turned away. "We'll see how brave you are when your husband's bleeding out in front of you." They made camp in the main house, treating the Garrett family home like a conquered fortress. Clara was bound to a chair in the main room, 2 guards assigned to watch her at all times. She studied them carefully, memorizing their movements. The one on the left was young, barely more than a boy, with nervous eyes. The one on the right was older, steadier, but he had a pronounced limp. Neither of them saw her as a threat. That was their mistake. As the night wore on, and the celebration grew louder, stolen whiskey, coarse laughter, the sounds of men who thought they'd already won, Clara continued working at her bonds. The rope was loosening. Slowly. Painfully. But loosening. She listened to the outlaws talk, gathering information from their careless words. "The canyon," one of them slurred. "That's where we'll take him. Box Canyon 3 miles north. Perfect killing ground. Garrett rides in, we cut off his escape, and then—" He drew his finger across his throat with a laugh. 3 miles north. Box Canyon. If she could get free, if she could find Silas before he reached the ranch, she could warn him about the ambush. She had to get free. Dawn approached gray and cold. The outlaws were making preparations to move loading horses, checking weapons. Clara's window was closing. The young guard had been drinking. Not as much as the others, but enough to dull his reflexes. The older guard had stepped away to relieve himself. Now or never. Clara gave one final twist, and the rope fell away from her wrists. She moved before she could think, grabbing the knife from the young guard's belt and driving it into his shoulder. He screamed and fell back. Clara didn't wait to see if he'd recover. She ran. "Get her!" Cole's voice cut through the chaos behind her. "Don't let her escape!" Clara burst through the kitchen door and into the gray morning light. Her bare feet hit the frozen ground, and pain shot up her legs, but she didn't slow down. The tree line. If she could reach the trees. A bullet whined past her ear. Another kicked up dirt at her feet. She zagged left, then right, running the way Silas had taught her, never in a straight line. 50 yards to the trees. 40, 30. She could hear them behind her boots, pounding, men cursing. Someone was gaining. 20 yards. 10. She plunged into the forest just as a hand grabbed the back of her nightgown. The fabric tore, but she kept running, branches whipping at her face, her bare feet slipping on frozen leaves. The outlaws' voices faded as the terrain slowed their pursuit. Clara didn't know where she was going, she just ran. Time lost meaning. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs threatened to give out. She ran until her feet were torn and bleeding, leaving a trail of red on the frozen ground. She ran until the sounds of pursuit faded to nothing, and the only noise was her own ragged breathing. Finally, when she could run no more, she collapsed against a fallen tree. Her body was a symphony of pain. Her feet were in agony. Her wrists were raw and bleeding. Her ribs ached from Cole's kick, and the cold, the bitter, relentless cold, was seeping into her bones. She was going to freeze to death if she didn't find shelter. But first, she had to warn Silas. The canyon, 3 miles north. That was where Cole planned to spring his trap. Clara forced herself to her feet. The sun was rising in the east, which meant south was behind her. The cattle drive had gone south. She picked a direction and started walking. The hours that followed were a blur of pain and determination. Clara's feet went numb first, which was almost a blessing. Then her fingers, then her face. She thought about Silas, about his gray eyes and his rare smile, about the way he held her at night like she was the most precious thing in the world, about the life they were building together. She would not let Cole Brennan take that away. She would not let Silas die. The sun climbed higher, offering weak warmth that did nothing against the cold. Clara's progress slowed. She stumbled more often, her vision blurred. Keep moving, she told herself. Just keep moving. It was mid-afternoon when she heard the horses. At first she thought it was a hallucination. She'd been seeing things for hours, phantom shapes, voices calling her name. But the sound grew louder, and suddenly there were riders emerging from the forest ahead. She tried to run, but her legs gave out. She collapsed into the snow, too weak to do anything but lift her head. The riders weren't Cole's men. "Good Lord Almighty," one of them breathed. Is that a woman? It's Mrs. Garrett." Another rider dismounted and rushed toward her. "Mrs. Garrett, can you hear me?" Clara recognized the voice. Jenkins, one of Silas's most trusted hands. "Jenkins." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Silas, I need to find Silas." "He's coming, ma'am. Word reached us about the raid. He's riding hard for the ranch." "No." Clara grabbed his arm with what little strength she had left. "It's a trap. The canyon. 3 miles north. They're waiting for him there." Jenkins' face went pale. "You escaped from them? Listen to me." Clara forced the words out through chattering teeth. 30 men. Maybe more. They're gonna kill him." Jenkins stared at her for a long moment. Then he turned to the other riders. "You two take Mrs. Garrett to the Henderson spread. It's the closest safe place. The rest of us ride to intercept the boss." "No." Clara struggled to sit up. "I'm coming with you." "Ma'am, with all due respect, you can barely stand." "I said I'm coming." She met his eyes with fierce determination. "He's my husband. I ain't sitting safely aside while he rides into danger." Jenkins hesitated. Then with a sigh he nodded. "Get her on a horse. Someone give her some boots." They rode hard through the fading afternoon. Clara clung to Jenkins' waist, wrapped in borrowed coats, fighting to stay conscious. But she held on. For Silas. She held on. They intercepted him just as the sun was setting. Silas was at the head of a group of riders pushing his horse to its limits. Even from a distance, Clara could see the terror on his scarred face, the desperation driving him forward. He saw them coming and reined up sharply, his hand going to his gun. Then he recognized Jenkins. Recognized the shape huddled behind him. His expression shattered. "Clara!" He was off his horse and running before the animal had fully stopped. He reached her just as Jenkins helped her dismount, and then she was in his arms, crushed against his chest. "I thought you were dead." His voice broke. "When I heard about the raid, when they said Brennan had taken you." "I'm here." Clara pressed her face into his neck. "I'm alive." He pulled back to look at her, and she saw tears streaming down his scarred face. Silas Garrett, the giant who never showed emotion, was weeping openly. "What did they do to you?" His eyes took in her torn nightgown, her bare feet wrapped in makeshift bandages, the bruises on her face. "I'll kill them. I'll kill every last one of them." "It's a trap, Silas." Clara gripped his shirt. "The canyon. 3 miles north. Cole's waiting there with 30 men. He wants to lure you in and ambush you." Silas's tears dried as cold fury replaced his relief. "The canyon," he repeated. "If you ride in there blind—" "I know that canyon." His voice was low, dangerous. "I know it better than they do." Jenkins stepped forward. "Boss, we've got maybe 15 men. Not enough for a frontal assault." "We ain't gonna assault." Silas's jaw tightened. "Brennan thinks he's the hunter. He thinks I'm gonna come charging in blind with rage." His eyes met Clara's. "He's wrong. What's the plan?" Silas looked at her for a long moment. Then he pulled her close one more time, holding her like he'd never let go. "Stay here," he said quietly. "Please. I need to know you're safe." Clara wanted to argue. Every part of her screamed against staying behind, but she saw the fear in his eyes. If she went with him, he'd be distracted, and distraction could get him killed. "Come back to me," she whispered. "I will." He kissed her fierce and desperate. "I promise." Then he was gone, mounting his horse, gathering his men, riding toward the canyon, where Cole Brennan waited. Clara watched until he disappeared into the gathering darkness, and then she prayed. The battle started just before midnight. Clara heard the gunfire from the Hendersons spread where Jenkins had finally convinced her to take shelter. Distant cracks that echoed across the mountains like thunder. She stood at the window, wrapped in blankets, straining to hear, to see, to know. The shooting went on for what felt like hours. Then gradually it faded. Silence fell over the land. Clara's heart pounded against her ribs. Please, she thought. Please let him be alive. Dawn was breaking when she heard horses approaching. She ran outside, ignoring the protests of Mrs. Henderson, and saw a group of riders coming up the road. Silas was at the front. Clara's legs gave out. She sank to her knees in the frozen mud, tears streaming down her face as Silas dismounted and ran to her. "It's over," he said, pulling her into his arms. "Brennan's dead. His gang is destroyed. It's over." "You're alive." She touched his face, his shoulders, his chest, making sure he was real. "You're alive." "I promised, didn't I?" He smiled through his own tears, that rare, beautiful smile. "I promised I'd come back." Clara pulled his face down to hers and kissed him with everything she had. All the fear, all the love, all the desperate relief pouring out of her in that single moment. When they finally broke apart, the sun was rising over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. "Let's go home," Clara said. Silas nodded, his gray eyes bright with emotion. "Home," he agreed. "Together." He lifted her onto his horse and climbed up behind her, wrapping his arms around her, holding her close. They rode toward Stone Creek Ranch as the sun climbed higher, leaving the darkness behind them. The battle was won, but the healing had only just begun. The ride back to Stone Creek Ranch was slow and somber. Of the 15 men Silas had brought into battle, 3 would not be returning. Their bodies were wrapped in blankets and secured to horses destined for burial in the small cemetery where Harriet and Daniel already rested. Clara leaned back against Silas's chest, feeling his heartbeat beneath her cheek, and tried to process everything that had happened. The barn was gone, just ashes and blackened beams against the morning sky. One of the smaller outbuildings had collapsed entirely. The main house still stood, but broken windows and bullet holes marred its walls. "We can rebuild," Clara said quietly, more to herself than to Silas. His arms tightened around her. "We will rebuild, together." Jack was waiting for them on the porch, his arm in a sling, his weathered face breaking into a broad smile when he saw them approaching. "Boss, Mrs. Garrett." He tipped his hat with his good hand. "Thank God you're both alive." Silas dismounted and helped Clara down, keeping one arm around her waist, as if afraid she might disappear. "Report." "We lost 6 men in the initial attack, 4 more wounded but recovering. The house is mostly intact. Those bastards did damage, but nothing that can't be fixed." Jack's eyes moved to Clara. "Ma'am, if I may say, what you did took more courage than I've seen from most men." Running through the forest like that, warning the boss about the trap. You saved a lot of lives. Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks. I did what anyone would have done. No. Silas's voice was fierce. You did what only you could have done. He turned to face her, and she saw pride shining in his gray eyes. You saved me, Clara. In more ways than one. The days that followed were exhausting. Clara threw herself into the work of restoration, ignoring the protests of everyone who told her she needed to rest. Her feet were still healing from her barefoot flight through the forest. Her ribs ached where Cole had kicked her, but she couldn't sit still, couldn't stop moving. If she stopped, she might have to think about how close she'd come to losing everything. You're pushing too hard, Silas said one evening, finding her in the kitchen long after everyone else had gone to bed. There's too much to do. It can wait until morning. No, it can't. Clara scrubbed harder at the pot in her hands. The men need feeding. The house needs cleaning. The accounts need... Silas crossed the room and took the pot from her hands, setting it aside. Then, he pulled her into his arms and held her. Stop, he said quietly. I can't. Why not? Clara's throat tightened. She pressed her face into his chest, breathing in the familiar scent of him, horse and leather and wood smoke. Because if I stop, I'll have to feel it, she whispered. Everything that happened, how scared I was, how close we came to... Her voice broke. Silas held her tighter. I know. Believe me, I know. I thought I was going to die, Silas. I thought I was never going to see you again. But you didn't die. You fought. You survived. He pulled back to look at her face. You're the strongest person I've ever known, Clara. You don't have to prove anything to anyone. I ain't trying to prove anything. I'm trying to... She stopped searching for words. I'm trying to make it feel real. This life. This home. You. If I keep working, if I keep building, then maybe it won't all disappear. Understanding dawned in Silas's eyes. You're scared it's going to be taken away. Everything good in my life has always been taken away. My father, my mother, every chance I ever got. Clara's voice trembled. I keep waiting for the other boot to drop, for something to come along and destroy this too. Silas cupped her face in his massive hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. Listen to me. Brennan is dead. His gang is destroyed. The danger is over. His thumbs brushed away her tears. I ain't going anywhere. This ranch ain't going anywhere, and I will spend the rest of my life making sure you know you're safe. You can't promise that. Nobody can promise. I can promise to try, every single day for as long as I live. His voice was fierce with conviction. You ain't alone anymore, Clara. You got me. You got this land. You got a whole community of people who've seen what you're made of and respect you for it. Clara stared up at him, this scarred giant who had seemed so cold and unreachable when she first arrived, and felt something loosen in her chest. I love you, she whispered. I love you too. More than I ever thought I could love anyone. Silas kissed her forehead. Now come to bed. The work will still be there tomorrow. He led her to their bedroom, and for the first time since the attack, Clara slept without nightmares. The community rallied around them in ways Clara never expected. It started 3 days after they returned, when a wagon appeared on the road to Stone Creek. Mrs. Henderson sat beside the driver, her stern face softened by something that looked almost like concern. Heard about what happened, she said gruffly, climbing down from the wagon. Brought some supplies, food blankets, medical things. Clara stared at the loaded wagon. Mrs. Henderson, this is too much. We can't. You can and you will. The older woman fixed her with a sharp look. Your husband has done more for this territory than most people know. Time we returned the favor. More wagons followed. Neighbors Clara had barely met arrived with lumber tools offers of help. The men from 4 ranches got together and announced they were going to rebuild the barn. A barn raising, Jack explained, grinning. Haven't had one of those in years. Whole community comes together. Should have it done in a few weeks. Clara watched the activity with wonder. In Philadelphia, neighbors had been strangers at best. Here, people she barely knew were giving up their time and resources to help rebuild something that wasn't even theirs. "This is how it works out here," Ruth Hollis told her watching the men unload lumber. "We take care of each other. Ain't no other way to survive." The barn raising became a community event that lasted nearly a month. Men came from ranches across the territory. Women brought food, so much food that Clara had to organize extra storage. Children ran and played among the construction while their parents worked. Clara found herself making friends. Real friends for the first time in her adult life. Sarah Murphy, who had helped tend the wounded after the attack, became a confidant. Agnes Crawford, despite her gruff exterior, proved to be surprisingly kind. "You've done well for yourself," Agnes told her one afternoon watching Clara organize supplies with efficient precision. "When I first heard Silas was bringing in a mail-order bride, I thought he'd lost his mind. Now I see he might be the smartest man in the territory." "I'm not sure about that." "I am." Agnes's eyes were sharp but warm. "You're good for him. He laughs now. Did you know that 8 years after his brother died, that man didn't laugh once? Now I hear him laughing all the time." Clara glanced across the yard to where Silas was working alongside the other men, lifting beams that would have taken 2 normal men to move. As she watched, one of the younger workers said something, and Silas threw his head back and laughed that rusty, wonderful sound she had come to treasure. "He's good for me too," Clara said softly. "That's how it should be." Agnes patted her arm. "That's how a real marriage works." The barn was completed on a bright morning in late May. The community gathered for a celebration, a dance and feast to mark the occasion. Clara had spent days preparing, working with Ruth and the other women to create a spread worthy of the event. "You've outdone yourself," Silas said, looking at the tables laden with food. "It's the least we could do. These people helped us rebuild our home." "Our home." Silas pulled her close. "I like the sound of that." The dance began at sunset. Clara watched from the edge of the gathering as couples swirled across the packed earth, laughing and spinning in the warm evening air. "May I have this dance?" She turned to find Silas standing behind her, his hand extended. He had changed into his best clothes, a clean white shirt, dark trousers, and somehow looked almost elegant despite his size. "You dance?" Clara asked, surprised. "My mother taught me, years ago." A shadow crossed his face at the mention of Harriet, but it passed quickly. "I'm told I ain't terrible." Clara smiled and placed her hand in his. "Then I'd be honored." He led her onto the dance floor, and the crowd parted to make room. Clara was aware of eyes watching them, the giant and his mail-order bride, but as Silas's arms wrapped around her, all of that faded away. "I never thought I'd have this," Silas murmured as they moved together. "A home, a wife, a future." "I know, neither did I. I thought I was destined to be alone. Thought that was what I deserved." His gray eyes met hers. "Then you showed up with your worn boots and your sharp tongue, and your stubborn refusal to let me push you away. You tried pretty hard." "I did. And you just kept coming back." He pulled her closer. "Thank you for not giving up on me." Clara reached up and touched his scarred face. "Thank you for giving me something worth fighting for." They danced until the music ended, and then they danced some more. And when the celebration finally wound down, they walked hand in hand back to the house they had rebuilt together. 2 weeks later, Silas did something that surprised them both. He found Clara in the kitchen one morning, and before she could say anything, he dropped to one knee. "What are you doing?" Clara stared at him. "We're already married." "I know." Silas reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "But that wedding, it wasn't right. It was rushed and sad and done for my mother's sake, not ours." He opened the box. Inside was a ring, not the worn gold band she already wore, but something new. A slender silver band, set with a small blue stone that caught the morning light. I had this made in town." Silas said, his voice rough with emotion. "The stone is called sapphire. The jeweler said it means loyalty and trust." Clara's eyes burned with tears. "Silas, what I'm trying to say badly, I know, is that I want to do this right. I want to give you the courtship you deserved, the wedding you should have had." He looked up at her with eyes full of love and hope and fear. "Clara May Garrett, will you marry me again, for real this time?" Clara laughed through her tears. "You ridiculous, wonderful man. Yes. Yes, I'll marry you again. 100 times if you want." Silas's face broke into the widest smile she'd ever seen. He slipped the ring onto her finger beside the worn gold band, and then he pulled her down into his arms and kissed her until neither of them could breathe. The second wedding was nothing like the first. Where their initial ceremony had been somber and quick, this one was a celebration. The entire community was invited. The same people who had helped rebuild their barn now gathered in the meadow behind the house to witness something even more important. Clara wore a white dress she and Ruth had spent weeks creating, simple but beautiful. Her hair was braided with wildflowers, and she carried a bouquet gathered from the meadow that morning. Silas stood waiting for her at the end of the aisle, looking uncomfortable in his new suit, but also something else. Happy. Genuinely, completely happy. Minister Weller spoke the vows with considerably more confidence this time, and when Silas said, "I do," his voice rang out clear and strong for everyone to hear. "I do," Clara answered, and meant it with every fiber of her being. "You may kiss the bride." This time there was no awkwardness, no hesitation. Silas pulled her into his arms and kissed her like they were the only two people in the world. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. "I love you," he murmured against her lips. "I love you too. Now and forever." The celebration lasted long into the night. There was dancing and feasting and more laughter than Clara had ever heard in one place. She moved through it all in a daze of happiness, accepting congratulations, dancing with what seemed like every man in the territory, before Silas finally claimed her for himself. "Happy?" he asked, holding her close as they swayed beneath the stars. "I don't think there's a word for what I am right now." Clara looked up at him. "Is this real? All of it?" "It's real." Silas pressed his forehead to hers. "This is our life now. This is who we are. The giant and his mail-order bride. The luckiest man in Montana and the woman who saved his soul." Clara kissed him again, and they danced on, surrounded by community, blessed with love. 3 months later, Clara discovered she was pregnant. She suspected it first in late August when the morning sickness began. At first, she thought it was something she'd eaten, but when it continued day after day, she began to wonder. The doctor in Copper Ridge confirmed it. She was going to have a baby. Clara kept the news to herself for 2 weeks, hugging the secret close, both terrified and overjoyed. She remembered Silas's words about being afraid about not knowing if he could handle the responsibility of a child. But she couldn't hide it forever. Her body was already changing, and Silas noticed everything. She chose a quiet evening in early October when they were sitting together by the fire. Silas had come in from a long day of work, tired but content, and settled into his chair with a cup of coffee. "Silas." He looked up. I need to tell you something." Something in her tone must have alerted him, because he set down his coffee and gave her his full attention. "What is it?" Clara took a deep breath. "I'm pregnant." The silence that followed was absolute. Silas stared at her, his gray eyes wide, his expression unreadable. "You're—" He seemed to be having trouble forming words. "We're—" "Yes." "A baby." "Yes." "My baby." "Our baby." Despite her nerves, Clara felt a smile tugging at her lips. "That's generally how it works." Silas continued to stare for a long moment. Then, without warning, he surged to his feet and crossed the room in 2 enormous strides. He dropped to his knees before her chair and placed his massive hands on her still flat belly with a gentleness that made her heart ache. "A baby," he whispered again. And then, to Clara's amazement, tears began sliding down his scarred cheeks. "We're gonna have a baby. Are you happy?" Silas looked up at her, and his face was transformed by an expression of such pure, overwhelming joy that it took her breath away. "Happy." He laughed, a sound of disbelief and wonder. "Clara, I don't have words for what I am. Happy don't begin to cover it." "But you said you were scared. About being a father." "I'm terrified." He took her hands in his. "But I'm also grateful. So incredibly, impossibly grateful." He pulled her down into his arms, cradling her against his chest. "A baby," he murmured into her hair. "Our baby. A piece of both of us. I was worried you wouldn't want Clara." He pulled back to look at her face, his gray eyes fierce. "This is the greatest gift anyone has ever given me. You. This baby. This life we're building." His voice cracked. "I spent 8 years thinking I didn't deserve happiness, thinking I was meant to be alone. And now—" He couldn't finish, but he didn't need to. Clara understood. "We're gonna be parents," she said softly. "We're gonna be parents." Silas laughed again, that wonderful rusty sound. "God help this child with me for a father." "You're gonna be wonderful." Clara touched his face. "I know it." How can you know?" "Because I've seen who you are. Not who you pretend to be, not who the world thinks you are. The real you." She smiled. "The man who cries when he's happy. The man who stayed up all night with a sick calf. The man who learned to love again even when it terrified him." Silas pulled her close, holding her like she was the most precious thing in the world. "I love you," he said. "Both of you. More than my own life." "We love you too." Clara closed her eyes, listening to his heartbeat. Now and forever. The baby came on a stormy night in late April. Clara had been restless all day, driven by an energy she couldn't explain. By evening, the restlessness had transformed into something else, a tightening across her belly that came and went with increasing regularity. "It's time," Ruth Hollis said after examining her. "We need to get you to bed." The hours that followed were the hardest of Clara's life. The pain came in waves, each one more intense than the last. She gripped Silas's hand so hard she was sure she must be crushing his fingers. But he never complained, never pulled away. "You're doing beautifully," Ruth encouraged. "Just a little more." "I can't," Clara gasped. "I can't do this." "Yes, you can." Silas's voice was steady, though his face was pale with worry. "You're the strongest person I know. Remember." Clara looked up at him. This man who had once seemed so cold and unreachable, and saw nothing but love and faith in his eyes. She pushed. And then, suddenly, miraculously, it was over. A thin cry filled the room, the most beautiful sound Clara had ever heard. Ruth was doing something at the foot of the bed, and then she was placing a tiny, squirming bundle in Clara's arms. "A girl," Ruth announced, beaming. "A beautiful, healthy girl." Clara stared down at the baby. She was so small, so perfect, with a shock of dark hair and gray eyes that blinked up at her with unfocused curiosity. "Hello?" Clara whispered. "Hello, my darling." Silas had gone completely still beside her. Clara looked up to find him staring at the baby with an expression of such raw wonder that fresh tears sprang to her eyes. "Silas, meet your daughter." He reached out with trembling hands, touching the baby's face with infinite gentleness. "She's perfect," he breathed. "Absolutely perfect." "She looks like you." God help her. But he was smiling through his tears. "What should we call her?" Clara had thought about this for months. She had considered family names, meaningful names, beautiful names, from stories she'd read. But in the end, there was only one name that felt right. "Harriet," she said softly. "After your mother." Silas looked up sharply, his gray eyes glistening. "Harriet," he repeated. "Hattie for short." "I like that." Clara smiled. "Your mother brought us together. It only seems right." Silas bent down and pressed a kiss to the baby's forehead, then to Clara's. "Harriet Garrett," he said quietly. "Welcome to the family." 3 years passed. Stone Creek Ranch had never been more alive. The sound of a child's laughter echoed across the property, now a sound that had been absent for far too long. Hattie had grown from that squalling newborn into a whirlwind of dark curls and gray eyes, with her father's stubborn determination and her mother's quiet strength. She followed Silas everywhere, and he carried her on his shoulders like she weighed nothing at all. Clara stood on the porch one autumn evening, watching them walk back from the barn. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. She placed one hand on her swelling belly, 5 months along now with their second child, and felt the familiar flutter of movement within. "Mama!" Hattie's voice rang out as she spotted Clara. "Papa showed me the new foal. She's so pretty." "Is she now?" "She's brown like chocolate." Hattie threw her arms around Clara's legs. "Can I name her, please?" Clara looked at Silas, who was watching them both, with an expression that still, after all this time, made her heart skip. "I think that can be arranged," he said, ruffling Hattie's hair. "But first supper, your mother needs to eat." "Your father needs to eat too," Clara countered. "He thinks I don't notice when he skips meals." Silas had the grace to look sheepish. "I had coffee." "Coffee ain't food, Silas Garrett." Hattie giggled at her parents' familiar banter, and they made their way inside together. Later that night, after Hattie had been put to bed and the house was quiet, Clara and Silas sat together on the porch. The stars were out, millions of them scattered across the Montana sky. "Do you ever think about how we got here?" Clara asked, leaning into his warmth. "What do you mean?" "I mean all of it. The advertisement. The train ride. That first day on this porch when you looked at me like I was the last thing you wanted to see." Silas chuckled. "I was scared. You were so small and fierce standing there telling me you weren't afraid of me. I was terrified. Could have fooled me." Clara smiled at the memory. "I thought you were going to send me back. I thought you'd take one look at me and decide I wasn't worth the trouble." Silas turned to face her, his gray eyes soft in the starlight. "You know what I thought that first day?" "What?" "I thought you were the bravest person I'd ever met. Standing there in your worn boots and your thin coat, telling me you could cook." He shook his head slowly. "I'd never met anyone like you. I didn't know what to do with you. So you tried to ignore me. I tried to protect myself, keep you at arm's length so you couldn't hurt me." His voice dropped. "Didn't work out so well." Clara took his hand, intertwining their fingers. "I'm glad it didn't." "Me too." Silas lifted her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. "You saved me, Clara. I was dying before you came. Not my body, my soul. I was just going through the motions waiting to join Daniel and my mother in the ground. And now I got everything I never knew I wanted. A wife who loves me despite all my scars. A daughter who thinks I hung the moon. Another baby on the way." His eyes glistened. "A life worth living." Clara leaned up and kissed him softly. "I love you, Silas Garrett." "I love you too, Clara. More than I got words for." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead. Inside the house, their daughter slept peacefully. Inside Clara, their son, they'd decided it felt like a boy kicked and squirmed. "I ain't pretty, sir," Clara said, suddenly echoing the words she'd written so long ago. Silas laughed, pulling her closer. "You're the most beautiful woman I've ever known, and you can definitely cook." Clara smiled against his chest. She thought about the woman she'd been 3 years ago, hungry, scared, convinced she wasn't worth anything. That woman would never have believed this was possible, would never have dared to hope for a life so full of love and warmth and belonging. But here she was. Home. "What are you thinking about?" Silas asked. "About how far we've come, both of us." "Long way from that cold porch in the middle of winter." "Long way," Clara agreed. She looked out at the land that had become hers, the mountains, the valleys, the ranch that had survived fire and violence and loss. She thought about Harriet, who had believed in her before they'd ever met. About Daniel, whose death had nearly destroyed Silas, but whose memory now lived on in the way they loved each other and their children. She thought about all the pain that had brought them to this moment, and all the joy that had come after. "No regrets?" Silas asked quietly. Clara considered the question. The hunger and the cold. The fear and the uncertainty. The terrible night when she'd run barefoot through the forest, not knowing if she'd ever see him again. "Not one," she said firmly. "Every single moment led me here. To you. To Hattie. To this life." She placed her hand over her heart. "I wouldn't change a thing." Silas pulled her into his arms and held her as the night deepened around them. They had walked through fire to find each other. They had faced death and loss and the darkest parts of human nature, but they had survived. Together. And now on this quiet Montana evening, with the stars blazing overhead and their family safe inside, they had everything they had ever wanted. Not because they deserved it. Not because life had been fair, but because they had fought for it, believed in it, refused to give up on each other. Clara Sutton had come to Montana with nothing but a carpetbag and a desperate hope. Clara Garrett would stay forever surrounded by love, anchored by family, finally and completely home. And that was more than enough. That was everything.